They stood in my driveway with their architect's plans rolled under their arms, my son and daughter-in-law, looking at me like I was already a ghost, haunting a house that no longer belonged to me. "Don't act like this is your family anymore, Helen," my daughter-in-law said, her voice sharp as January wind. Those words hung in the air between us like poison. I was 68 years old, standing on land my late husband Frank and I had bought 43 years ago, when it was nothing but scrub brush and possibility. My name is Helen Parker, and this is the story of how I learned that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, and how sometimes the sweetest justice comes from simply taking back what's yours. Before we go any further, I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop your city and state in the comments. It helps me know I'm not alone in this world, and maybe my story will resonate with someone out there who needs to hear it. Now let me take you back to where this all started, or really where it all fell apart. Frank died 3 years ago. Heart attack, sudden as lightning, devastating as thunder. We'd been married 46 years, raised 2 boys in our modest home in Asheville, North Carolina. The house sat on 12 acres of beautiful mountain land that Frank and I had scrimped and saved to buy when we were just kids ourselves. We'd always talked about dividing it up someday, maybe letting the boys build their own homes on portions of it. Family land, we called it. A legacy. I should have known better than to trust in legacies. My oldest son, David, married Brittany 6 years ago. She was 32 to his 43, blonde and ambitious with a smile that never quite reached her calculating eyes. I tried to like her. God knows I tried. But from the moment she joined our family, she started measuring everything, our furniture, our traditions, our land, like she was taking inventory of what would eventually be hers. After Frank died, I was drowning in grief. David and Brittany were attentive at first. They'd come by for dinners, help with yard work, sit with me on the porch. I thought I was blessed to have them nearby. I thought wrong. About a year after Frank's funeral, they started talking about their dreams of building a custom home. They'd found this architect, showed me glossy renderings of a massive modern farmhouse, 4,000 square feet of glass and steel and stone. It was beautiful. I'll give them that. And expensive. Way beyond what a high school teacher and a dental hygienist could afford. That's when Brittany started the campaign. "You know, Mom," she'd say, that term of endearment sounding like sandpaper in her mouth, "this house is really too much for you to maintain alone. All these acres. The upkeep. What if you fell and no one found you for days?" She'd plant these seeds of fear like they were doing me favors, watering them with fake concern until I started questioning whether I really could manage on my own. The suggestion came on a cold Tuesday in March, delivered over coffee at my kitchen table. David did most of the talking while Brittany nodded along, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "Mom, we've been thinking," David began, and my stomach clenched because nothing good ever follows those words. "What if we built our new home on the back 5 acres of your property? You'd have family right there. We could check on you daily, and when the time comes..." He paused delicately. "When you're ready to downsize or move into assisted living, the property would stay in the family." I sat there, Frank's coffee mug still in my hand. I couldn't bring myself to use any other, and felt the trap closing around me like a steel jaw. "We'd take care of everything," Brittany jumped in, her voice honey-sweet. "The permits, the construction, all of it. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. And think about your future grandchildren playing in your backyard." They didn't have children yet, but she wielded that possibility like a weapon, knowing how much I dreamed of being a grandmother. "I'll think about it," I said, because I was raised to be polite, even when my instincts were screaming warnings. Over the next 3 months, the pressure intensified. They brought lawyers to my house. "Just to help you understand the options, Mom," and presented me with papers that would deed the back 5 acres to them for $1. A gift, they called it, an investment in family. My younger son, Thomas, lived in Seattle with his husband, Marcus. When I called him uncertain and afraid, he urged caution. "Mom, don't sign anything until I can come home and review it with you. Something feels off about this." But David and Brittany had an answer for everything. The construction loan was time-sensitive. The architect's schedule was filling up. They'd already started planning, dreaming, investing emotionally. Didn't I want to be part of their future? In a moment of weakness, grieving and lonely and desperate to feel needed, I signed. The paperwork was handled so quickly, it should have been my first clue. Within a week, they owned 5 acres of what Frank and I had built together. They were effusive with gratitude, bringing me flowers and wine, promising Sunday dinners and holiday traditions. That lasted exactly as long as it took for the ink to dry. The first change was subtle. They stopped asking before coming onto the property. They'd survey their land now, measuring and marking, bringing contractors and engineers. My opinion went from requested to tolerated to ignored. Then Brittany started commenting on my house. "This old place really clashes with our vision," she said one afternoon, standing in my living room like she was already planning its demolition. "All this dated wood paneling and those ancient appliances. When we have events in our new home, it's going to be awkward having this eyesore right in front." "This is my home," I said quietly. "Frank and I built our life here." She smiled that cold smile. "Of course, Mom, for now." The construction started in May with the violence of heavy machinery tearing into earth that had been undisturbed for decades. I'd wake at 6 a.m. to the sound of excavators and bulldozers, the peaceful mountain mornings I'd cherished replaced by diesel engines and shouted instructions. They'd promised to be respectful of my space, but their contractors parked in my driveway, blocked my garage, used my outdoor spigot without asking. When I complained to David, he sighed like I was being difficult. "Mom, we're building our dream home. There's going to be some inconvenience. Can't you be supportive?" Supportive. That word became a bludgeon they used whenever I expressed the slightest concern. The foundation went in, then the framing. I watched their house rise from my kitchen window like a monument to my own foolishness. It was even bigger than the rendering suggested, looming over my modest home like a judgment. Brittany started bringing her mother around, a sharp-faced woman named Sandra, who looked at me like I was the help. They'd walk the property, planning gardens and outdoor kitchens, discussing where they'd put the pool and the guest house, on land I'd given them out of love. "You know, Helen," Sandra said to me one afternoon, not even bothering with the pretense of calling me Mom, "once they're settled in here, you really should think about moving somewhere more appropriate for your age. There are some lovely senior communities in Hendersonville." I was 68, not 90. I still hiked 3 miles every morning, tended a garden that fed me year-round, and had a sharper mind than Brittany on her best day. But in their eyes, I was already obsolete, a problem to be managed and eventually discarded. Thomas called every week, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "Mom, how bad is it, really?" "It's fine," I'd lie, because admitting the truth felt like admitting defeat. "They're just stressed with the construction." But it wasn't fine. David had stopped coming by unless Brittany was with him, and when he did, he avoided my eyes. My son, who I'd rocked through nightmares and cheered through baseball games, who'd cried in my arms when his first marriage fell apart, was disappearing into someone I didn't recognize. The house was finished by October, a sprawling masterpiece of modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows and a chef's kitchen that probably cost more than Frank and I spent on our entire home. They threw a housewarming party and invited half of Asheville. I wasn't invited. I watched from my window as cars lined the driveway, as people I'd never seen before walked across land that used to be mine, drinking champagne and admiring my son's success. The lights from their house blazed into my bedroom that night, and I lay awake feeling like a stranger in the only home I'd ever known. The next morning, Brittany knocked on my door at 7 a.m. She didn't wait for me to invite her in, just pushed past me into my kitchen with a folder of papers. "We need to talk about your future here, Helen," she said, spreading documents across my table. The papers were from an attorney, not the friendly one who'd helped with the land transfer, but a different one whose name was embossed on expensive letterhead. I recognized the firm. They handled complex real estate negotiations in Asheville. "What is this?" I asked, my voice steadier than my hands. Brittany settled into my chair like she owned it. "David and I have been discussing the situation, and we think it's time to address the elephant in the room. This property arrangement isn't working. Your house is affecting our property value, and frankly, having you here is creating complications we didn't anticipate." I stared at her. This woman who'd called me mom while convincing me to give away my land, who'd promised family dinners and grandchildren, who'd smiled and hugged me while planning my removal. "Complications," I repeated. "You have to understand from our perspective," she continued, as if she was being reasonable. "We've invested over $800,000 in our home. When we eventually sell, and property like this, properly developed, could go for $2 million or more, your house brings down the entire value. Plus the land you're still sitting on, that's prime real estate being wasted." The land I was sitting on was my 7 acres, the portion I'd kept when I gave them their 5, the portion with my house, my memories, my life. "This is my home," I said. She slid a paper toward me. "We're prepared to offer you $300,000 for the remaining acreage and your house. That's very generous, Helen. It's well above market value for a property this old. You could buy a nice condo in town, something easy to maintain. No more worrying about upkeep or being alone out here." $300,000 for 12 acres of mountain land that was currently valued at minimum $200,000 per acre. They were offering me roughly 1/8 of what my property was worth and calling it generous. "No," I said simply. Her face hardened. "Think carefully about this. We're being kind by making an offer at all. The easement agreements for the driveway access, the shared well system, these things can become very complicated if we're not cooperating as a family." The threat was clear. The driveway that led to my house crossed through what was now their property. The well that supplied my water was technically on the boundary line. They could make my life very difficult if they chose to. "Where's David?" I asked. "Does he know you're here?" Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or irritation at being questioned. "David and I make decisions together. He agrees this is best for everyone." I stood up, gathering the papers into a pile and handing them back to her. "Tell David if he has something to say to me, he can come say it himself. And tell your attorney I'm not selling." She stood too, her pleasant mask cracking to reveal the calculation beneath. "You're making a mistake. We tried to do this the nice way, but there are other options. Don't force us to pursue them." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table for an hour, Frank's absence like a physical ache in my chest. He would have known what to do. He would have seen through Brittany from the start, would have protected me from my own grief-driven mistakes. But Frank was gone, and I was alone with the consequences of my choices. I called Thomas that night. When I told him everything, the offer, the threats, the casual cruelty of it all, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "I'm coming home," he finally said, his voice tight with anger. "This weekend. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and Mom, it's time to fight back." That Friday, Thomas and Marcus arrived from Seattle. My younger son had always been quieter than David, more thoughtful, less concerned with appearances. But as he walked through my house, seeing how close their massive home loomed over mine, watching their security cameras that now pointed toward my property, his jaw set in a way that reminded me of Frank. "This is elder abuse," Marcus said bluntly. He was an attorney specializing in corporate law, but he knew enough to recognize predatory behavior when he saw it. "Everything about this situation is designed to pressure you into giving up your home and your land. I already gave them 5 acres, I said, the shame of it burning in my throat. "Under duress, while you were grieving," Thomas countered. "But that's done. The question is what happens now." That evening, David finally appeared at my door. He looked tired, older somehow, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. For a moment, I saw my son, the boy who'd held my hand on his first day of school, who danced with me at his father's funeral. Then Brittany's car pulled up behind him, and the moment shattered. "Mom, we need to talk about the offer," he started. "No," Thomas said, appearing behind me. "You need to talk about what the hell you're doing to your mother." The confrontation that followed was ugly. Brittany stood on my porch, her voice rising as she detailed all the ways I was being unreasonable, selfish, standing in the way of their future. David said nothing, just stood there like a man drowning, unable or unwilling to choose between his mother and his wife. "You gave us that land," Brittany spat. "You can't take it back now just because you're having regrets." "She's not trying to take anything back," Marcus interjected calmly, "but she's also not giving up her home because you want to flip this property for a profit." That's when Brittany made her mistake. In her anger, she revealed the truth. "We already have buyers interested," she snapped. "A developer who wants the whole 12 acres for a luxury subdivision. We could clear $4 million easy once we acquire the remaining parcel, but not with her and that shack sitting in the middle of it." The silence that followed was deafening. If you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends. David's face went pale. "Brittany!" "What?" she challenged. She was going to find out eventually. This was never about family, Helen. This was about investment. Good land doesn't stay good when you've got a 60-year-old house dragging down its potential. I looked at my oldest son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, and saw him for what he'd become, a coward who'd traded his integrity for his wife's ambitions. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Both of you." "It's our property too," Brittany shot back. "And you're going to sell us the rest, or we'll make your life so miserable you'll beg to leave." They made good on that threat. The next week, I received a cease and desist letter claiming I was trespassing on their portion of the driveway. The shared well suddenly needed emergency repairs that required shutting off my water access for days at a time. Their landscaping crew began work at 6 a.m. every morning, running chainsaws and wood chippers right along the property line. Then came the code enforcement complaints, anonymous reports that my house was a safety hazard, that my septic system was failing, that I was running an illegal home business. None of it was true, but each complaint meant inspectors, paperwork, stress. Thomas and Marcus stayed for 2 weeks, documenting everything, the harassment, the threats, the systematic campaign to force me out. Marcus made calls to attorneys in Asheville, trying to find someone who specialized in elder law and property rights. That's when we found Rebecca Chen. She was 45, sharp as a blade, with a reputation for taking on cases other attorneys wouldn't touch. She came to my house on a Tuesday, walked the property, reviewed all the documentation, and listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just spotted prey. "Mrs. Parker," she said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. How badly do you want to keep this house?" "It's my home," I said. "Frank and I built our life here. I'll fight for it until my last breath." She nodded. "Good. Because what I'm about to propose is going to be expensive. It's going to be ugly, and it's going to destroy whatever relationship remains with your son. But if we do this right, we won't just protect your property. We'll make sure they never profit from what they've done." She spread a map of my land. Across the table, marking parcels and boundaries, access roads and easements. As she talked, explaining the legal strategy she had in mind, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. "The deed transfer you signed," Rebecca said, tapping the document. "It has a problem. Several problems, actually. The attorney who drew it up, he represented both parties, which is an ethical violation. The language around the well rights and driveway access is ambiguous at best, fraudulent at worst, and the consideration paid, $1, could be challenged as unconscionable given your emotional state at the time. Can we reverse it? I asked, my heart pounding. Maybe, but that's not what I'm recommending. Rebecca's eyes gleamed. If we try to undo the transfer, we'll be in court for years, and the outcome is uncertain. But there's another option, one that hits them where it really hurts. She pulled out another document, a survey map of the full 12 acres, including detailed easement information I'd never seen before. When your husband bought this land 43 years ago, he was very careful about the deed structure. The property has legal access through what's called a flag lot configuration. Your 7 acres at the back have guaranteed easement access through the front 5, but she paused meaningfully. The current access road they're using, the one they paved and improved at great expense, it's actually not the legal easement route. I stared at the map, seeing what she meant. The legal easement ran along the western boundary, a rough path Frank and I had never developed because the main driveway was more convenient. But legally, that western route was the only access they were required to maintain. The road they're using crosses your property, Rebecca continued. Property you still own. They've been treating it as a shared driveway, but legally, without a formal easement agreement, they're trespassing every time they use it. What about my access? I asked. I need that driveway too. You have legal access through the western route. It needs work, but it's viable. Or, she smiled that predatory smile again. We could offer them an easement agreement for the current driveway at fair market value. The number she wrote down made my breath catch. $300,000, the same amount they'd offered me for my entire property. Now the price for a simple driveway easement. They'll never pay that, I said. No, Rebecca agreed. They won't. Which means we revoke their access to the current driveway and require them to use the legal easement, the one that runs through heavy woods and would cost them another $100,000 to make passable. Or, she paused for effect, they could try to prove they have prescriptive rights to the driveway, which would require proving continuous use for 20 years. Hard to do when they've only owned the property for 6 months. This would trap them, I said, slowly. Their beautiful home, accessible only by a rutted forest road. It would certainly impact their property value, Rebecca said neutrally, make it much harder to sell to those developers they're courting. But Mrs. Parker, before we proceed, you need to understand something. This will end your relationship with David. There's no coming back from this kind of legal warfare. I thought about my son, the boy I'd raised, and the man he'd become. I thought about Frank, who'd worked himself to exhaustion to give us this land. I thought about all the years I had left and whether I wanted to spend them displaced and discarded or fighting for what was mine. Do it, I said. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. David showed up at my door that evening, his face flushed with anger, waving the legal papers like they were a personal betrayal. "What is this?" he demanded. "You're suing us for using the driveway, your own son?" "The son who tried to steal my home?" I replied, standing in my doorway but not inviting him in. "The son who stood by while his wife threatened me and harassed me. We made you a fair offer. You offered me a fraction of what my land is worth, so you could sell it to developers for millions. Don't insult me by calling that fair." Brittany appeared behind him, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked rattled. "This is insane. We have a mortgage on that house based on its access and value. You can't just cut off our driveway." "I'm not cutting off anything," I said calmly, channeling Rebecca's coached response. "You have full legal access through the western easement. I'm simply declining to grant you free use of my private property. That driveway has been there for 40 years. And it's been my driveway on my land for 40 years. You don't get it just because you built a house next door." The legal battle that followed consumed the next 4 months. They hired expensive attorneys who filed motion after motion, arguing for emergency access, claiming hardship, suggesting I was being vindictive and unreasonable. Rebecca met every motion with airtight responses. She documented every threat they'd made, every piece of harassment, every attempt to pressure me into selling. She showed a clear pattern of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The judge was a woman in her 70s named Margaret Thornton, and when she reviewed the case file, I saw her expression harden. During one hearing, Brittany made the mistake of complaining about how my old, ugly house was ruining their property value. Judge Thornton looked up from her papers with ice in her eyes. "Let me make sure I understand, Mrs. Parker," she said, addressing Brittany. "You convinced your husband's elderly mother to gift you 5 acres of land worth over $1 million for $1. Then you built an expensive home on that gifted land, and now you're arguing she should be forced to grant you additional free use of her remaining property because otherwise your investment might not be as profitable as you'd hoped." Brittany stammered something about family and expectations. "I see a lot of exploitation cases in this courtroom," Judge Thornton continued, "but the audacity of this one is remarkable. Motion denied. Mrs. Parker has no legal obligation to grant you easement access across her property without compensation. If you want to use her driveway, negotiate a fair price. If you can't reach an agreement, use your legal access route." The victory was sweet, but it was just the beginning. Because while we were fighting over the driveway, Rebecca had been digging into the original land transfer, and what she found changed everything. The attorney who'd handled the deed, the one who'd rushed the paperwork and represented both parties, had lost his license the previous year for ethics violations in another case. The deed transfer was void. "The transfer is legally invalid," Rebecca explained in her office, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Which means the 5 acres still belong to you, everything on it, including their $800,000 house, was built on land they don't own." I sat in stunned silence as the implications washed over me. Their dream home, their investment, their entire scheme, all of it built on land that was still legally mine. "What are my options?" I asked. Rebecca laid out 3 scenarios. 1. I could validate the transfer retroactively, essentially giving them what we now knew was obtained through fraud. 2. I could demand they remove the house, a legal right but practically complicated and expensive. 3. I could offer to sell them the land at current fair market value. "What's fair market value?" I asked. $1.2 million, Rebecca said. "That's what comparable acreage in your area sells for. They'd have to buy the land their house sits on or forfeit the house." I thought about the $300,000 they'd offered me for my entire property. I thought about Brittany's sneer when she called my home a shack. I thought about David's silence when I needed him to speak up. "Let's make them an offer," I said. The letter Rebecca sent was professionally brutal. It detailed the invalid transfer, outlined my legal ownership of the disputed 5 acres, and offered them 2 options: remove the house within 90 days or purchase the land for $1.2 million. They had 30 days to respond. The call from David came at 2 in the morning. He was crying, the sound of it breaking something in my chest despite everything. "Mom, please," he sobbed. "We'll lose everything. The house, our savings, everything we've worked for. You can't do this." "You were willing to take everything from me," I said quietly. "My home, my land, my dignity. Why should I show you mercy you never showed me? I'm your son. Then act like it. Come to my house tomorrow without Brittany and tell me the truth about everything. Why you really did this, when you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as an obstacle." He showed up the next morning looking like he hadn't slept. For 2 hours, we talked, really talked, for the first time since Frank died. He admitted Brittany had pushed for everything, that he'd been weak and desperate to make her happy, that he'd convinced himself I'd be better off in a smaller place anyway. "I told myself we were helping you," he said, his voice hollow, "that we were planning for your future. But the truth is we were planning for ours, and you were just in the way." "Yes," I said simply, "you were." "What do I do now, Mom? We can't afford to buy the land. We can't afford to move the house. We're going to lose everything." I looked at my son. really looked at him and saw genuine remorse for the first time. But I also saw weakness, the same weakness that had let him participate in trying to steal my home. "You're going to learn," I said, "that actions have consequences." The final settlement took 6 weeks to negotiate. Thomas and Marcus flew back to help me navigate the decisions, and together we crafted terms that would protect me while not completely destroying David. Here's what we agreed to. I would sell David the 5 acres for $800,000, 2/3 of market value, a significant discount but more than double what they'd paid me. They had to secure financing within 60 days, or the sale was void, and they'd have to remove the house. They barely made the deadline, taking out a massive second mortgage that would strain their finances for years. The home that was supposed to be their dream became an anchor around their necks, but that wasn't the end of it. I also required them to sign an agreement. No contact with me except through attorneys for any reason. Immediate cessation of all harassment and public acknowledgement in writing that they had attempted to defraud me of my property. Brittany refused at first, but faced with losing everything, she signed. The look on her face when she put her signature on that document was worth every sleepless night I'd endured. With the $800,000, I did something they never expected. I had the Western Access Road properly developed, paved, graded, and landscaped. Then I commissioned a survey of my remaining 7 acres and had it subdivided into 2 parcels. One parcel, with my house, I put in an irrevocable trust for Thomas. The other 3 acres, prime building land with mountain views they could only dream of, I sold to a lovely retired couple from Florida for $600,000. That couple built a beautiful home that made David and Brittany's modern monstrosity look cheap by comparison. And because the new house sits on higher ground, it blocks their sunset view entirely. The developer Brittany had been courting lost interest once the property couldn't be assembled as one package. The subdivision scheme died, and with it, their dreams of a massive profit. I still live in my home, the one Frank and I built together. I wake up every morning to mountain views and the sound of birds instead of bulldozers. Thomas visits every few months, and we sit on the porch talking about his father, keeping his memory alive in a place he loved. David and I haven't spoken in over a year. I hear things sometimes, that they're struggling with the mortgage, that Brittany pushes him to try again to buy my remaining land, that their marriage is strained under the weight of their debts. I don't take pleasure in their suffering, but I won't rescue them from consequences they earned. Some people might say I should have forgiven them, that family matters more than money or land. But those people never had their son look them in the eye and see dollar signs instead of love. They never had someone try to steal their home while calling it help. I'm 71 now, and I learned something important through all of this. Kindness without boundaries is just permission for people to use you. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach people that you can't be taken advantage of anymore. My land is mine. My home is mine. My dignity is mine. And nobody, not even my own son, gets to take that away.
My thoughts on the story. This story is truly a journey of tears and triumph, making me both angry at the betrayal of blood relatives and admiring the strength of resilience in the twilight of life. Helen Parker, a 68-year-old widow in North Carolina, was taken advantage of by her son David and daughter-in-law Brittany, forcing her to give up 5 acres of land on the 12-acre mountain garden that she and her late husband had cultivated for 43 years. From the pain of losing her husband, they cleverly seduced her with promises to build her dream house, then gradually turned her into an extra person on her own land. The climax when they asked her to sell the remaining land at a cheap price, excluding her from the housewarming party, made me feel indignant. It was like a knife cut into the hearts of the elderly, who have sacrificed their lives for their children. But then, the support of her youngest son Thomas and his husband, along with attorney Rebecca Chen, turned the tables, transforming Helen from victim to true winner. I love how the story went beyond family drama and emphasized legal justice, with twists like the right-of-way being voided, making their dream home a burden. Overall, this is an inspiring story of recovery, reminding that age is not a weakness, but sometimes a source of strength from life experience. Lessons learned. From this tragic but happy ending story, I learned a few valuable lessons. especially about family relationships and personal rights. Set clear boundaries, even with relatives. David and Brittany exploited Helen's kindness and loneliness to manipulate her, but she learned that unbounded kindness invites exploitation. Lesson: always consult a third party, like a lawyer or other children, before signing any important documents, especially those related to property. Family doesn't always mean security. Persistence and seeking help can be a game changer. Helen could have easily caved into pressure, but thanks to Thomas and Rebecca, she overturned legal evidence, like the easement and void transfer issues. Lesson: don't be afraid to speak up or ask for help. A call to a lawyer can save a lifetime's legacy. Persistence requires not only courage but also concrete action. Your property and legacy are yours. Protect it. Brittany's suggestion that she go to a nursing home or demand a cheap sale of land shows how greed can overshadow bloodline. Lesson: plan ahead, like putting the house into a trust, like Helen did with Thomas, to avoid conflict. And remember, the true value of your dream home lies in its peace of mind, not its size or price.